The Midnight Secret. She was supposed to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair, so why were her shoes muddy at 3 a.m.? Grandpa Ned had lived 81 years without ever believing in miracles. He'd buried a wife, survived 2 wars, raised 4 children on a schoolteacher's salary, and watched the world change so many times that change itself had stopped surprising him. He was a man built from practical things, calloused hands, black coffee, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. He did not believe in miracles. Until the night he found his granddaughter's gym bag. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November when Ned shuffled down the hallway of his son's house in his wool socks and plaid robe, heading toward the kitchen for his nightly glass of water. He'd been staying with Daniel and Clara for 3 weeks now, ever since his hip surgery had slowed him down enough that the family voted, unanimously and without consulting him, that he shouldn't be alone. He resented it mildly. He understood it deeply. The house was dark and quiet. Daniel worked early mornings and slept like a rock. Clara, his daughter-in-law, had her own insomnia habits. Sometimes Ned heard her in the kitchen at strange hours, the soft clink of a spoon against a mug. But tonight, it wasn't Clara he found in the kitchen. It was the gym bag. Sitting on the kitchen table like it owned the place. Black canvas, the zipper half open, a logo from a fitness center downtown printed on the side. Ned stopped in the doorway and stared at it the way you stare at something that shouldn't exist. Because it couldn't. That gym bag belonged to Maya. And Maya had not walked in 4 years. Maya was Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, Ned's granddaughter by blood and by every definition that mattered. She was 26 now, sharp-tongued and brilliant, studying environmental law online because she couldn't navigate most campus buildings in her wheelchair. The accident had happened when she was 22, a drunk driver, a rainy Tuesday, the kind of story that ends careers and marriages, and according to 3 separate neurologists, walking. Incomplete spinal injury, the doctors had said carefully, there's always some hope, but realistically, prepare yourselves. They had prepared themselves. Daniel had modified the house. Clara had learned to cook meals that didn't require Maya to lift heavy pots. Ned himself had built her a wooden ramp for the back porch during a summer visit, measuring twice and cutting once the way his own father had taught him. They had all wrapped their love around the shape of her new life and called it acceptance. Maya was fierce about her independence. She hated pity. She hated the way strangers smiled too gently at her. She hated the word inspiration. She'd said once, at Sunday dinner, I'm not your motivation poster, I'm just a person who can't feel her legs. So why was her gym bag in the kitchen at midnight? Ned crossed to the table slowly. His hip ached. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and the ghost of whatever Clara had cooked for dinner. He stood over the bag and did not touch it for a long moment, just looked at it, at the half-open zipper, at the white drawstring of something inside, at a single muddy sneaker that had been shoved in carelessly, its sole still damp. Muddy. The sneaker was muddy. Ned pulled out the chair and sat down because his legs suddenly needed him too. His mind, sharp still, sharper than his children gave him credit for, turned the information over slowly, carefully, the way he'd once approached an unexploded ordnance in Korea. Carefully, don't rush, think before you touch. Maya's gym bag, fitness center downtown, muddy sneakers, midnight. He reached into the bag with a steadiness he didn't feel and pulled out the sneaker. Size 7, women's running shoe, not a wheelchair user's shoe, which tended to stay clean because they never touched the ground. This shoe had been walked in, recently, hard. Ned set the shoe on the table and sat with his hands folded and waited. He didn't have to wait long. The back door opened at 12:14 a.m. and Maya came through it. She was walking. Not smoothly, there was a brace on her left leg that went from ankle to knee, and she moved with the careful, deliberate concentration of someone crossing a frozen lake. Each step was its own small act of will. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were fixed on the middle distance. She was wearing gym clothes, and her hair was pulled back, and she was sweating despite the cold night air. She did not see him until she was already inside. When she did, she froze. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the old man at the table, the young woman in the doorway, and the silence lasted so long it almost became a third person in the room. "Grandpa Ned," Maya said finally. Her voice was careful, measured. "Maya," he said. She closed the back door behind her. She walked, still that slow, concentrated walk, to the kitchen counter and leaned against it with a casualness that didn't fool him for a second. She was catching her breath. She was also deciding how much to tell him. "You're going to ask," she said. "Eventually," he said. "I'm old, I've got time." She almost smiled, almost. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, calculating something. "Seriously, about 8 months, but I've been working on it for 2 years. Physical therapy, this experimental nerve stimulation thing, a trainer who used to work with spinal injury patients at a rehab hospital." She paused. "I found a clinical trial. I didn't tell anyone I was applying." Ned absorbed this. "Why not?" "Because," Maya said, and her voice changed, went quieter, went tighter, went to a place that had clearly been lived in for a long time, "because everyone in this family already rewrote their story about me. I didn't want them to rewrite it again. I didn't want Dad to get his hopes up and then watch me fail. I didn't want Clara hovering. I didn't want—" She stopped, looked at him. "I didn't want to be a project again." Ned nodded slowly, that he understood. He understood it in his bones. "The doctors said you'd never walk," he said. "The doctors said realistically," Maya said, and there was iron in it. "I've never liked that word." He found out the rest of it over the next hour, sitting at that kitchen table while Maya made them both tea she didn't really want and he didn't really need. She told him about the clinical trial, a nerve stimulation program being run out of a university hospital 40 minutes away. She told him about the trainer, a woman named Patricia who had worked with her twice a week for 18 months. She told him about the brace, which was custom-fitted and had cost her most of her savings. She told him that 3 months ago, she had taken her first unassisted steps in 4 years in a physical therapy gym while Patricia watched and said nothing because Maya had specifically told her not to make a big deal of it. "I cried in my car for 45 minutes after," Maya said. "Then I drove home and made dinner and acted completely normal." "And your father doesn't know," Ned said. "Nobody knows," she looked at him steadily, "until right now." Ned thought about Daniel, his son, who had spent 4 years quietly rearranging his entire life around Maya's wheelchair, who had never once complained about it, who carried the particular grief of a parent watching a child suffer with a stoicism that Ned recognized because he had taught it to him. He thought about Clara, who had married into this family knowing exactly what she was signing up for and had done it without hesitation. He thought about the ramp he'd built on the back porch. The ramp Maya hadn't used tonight. She'd come up the stairs. "This will change things," Ned said. "I know. Your father's going to feel," he paused, searching for the honest word. "He's going to feel like you didn't trust him." Maya set her mug down. "I didn't, not with this, not yet." She looked at her grandfather directly, and he saw in her face all the complexity of it, the love and the frustration and the need to be something other than a story that happened to her. "I needed this to be mine first. Is that wrong?" Ned thought about that for a long time. He thought about the year after his wife died, when he'd started painting watercolors in the garage because he'd needed something that was just his. He thought about the way grief and hope both required privacy sometimes, a space where they could exist without being witnessed, without being weighed by someone else's emotions. He thought about how much courage it took to want something quietly, to work toward it in secret, to protect a fragile hope from the well-meaning hands of the people who loved you. "No," he said finally, "it's not wrong." Maya let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for months. "But," Ned said, and she looked at him, "you're going to have to tell them." "I know. Soon." "I know, Grandpa Ned. Because your father put a ramp on that back porch, and I built it crooked on purpose so he'd feel useful, and neither of us is going to get that time back." He said it without bitterness, just with the honesty of a man who'd run out of patience for anything less. And he deserves to know that his daughter is walking. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. She blinked once, deliberately, the way people do when they refuse to cry in front of someone. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll tell him tomorrow." "Good," Ned said. He finished his water. His hip ached. He was tired in the deep way of very old men at very late hours, tired in the body, but not in the mind still turning over what he'd witnessed tonight. This young woman walking through a dark kitchen on legs that weren't supposed to work, carrying a secret that weighed more than her gym bag, braver than anyone in this family gave her credit for. He stood up slowly, and Maya stood too, and he looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't done in too long, and he did something he almost never did. He opened his arms. She crossed the kitchen and hugged him, and he felt how strong she'd become, the muscles in her back and shoulders built from 2 years of fighting her own body into cooperation. She was not fragile. She had never been fragile. He had just forgotten to look past the wheelchair long enough to see it. "Doctors said you'd never walk again," he murmured into her hair. "Yeah," Maya said. "What do doctors know?" She laughed, really laughed, surprised out of her composure, and pulled back, and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and he was already shuffling toward the hallway. "Grandpa Ned," she called after him. He stopped. "Thank you for not making it a big deal." He waved one hand without turning around. "That's what you do for family," he didn't say. "You let them have their miracles in their own time." He went to bed. He slept better than he had in weeks. And in the morning, Maya told her father. The ramp on the back porch stayed anyway. Ned had built it well, crooked or not. Some things you keep, not because you need them, but because they're proof of how far you were willing to go for someone you loved, and that proof deserves to stand. Some secrets aren't betrayals. Some are just hope, kept warm until it's ready to breathe.